GM.
GM, everyone. Welcome back to the Solana Weekly Wrap-Up, where we chat through Solana's biggest stories straight from the SolanaFloor newsroom. So I'm Thomas Bahamas, and I am very excited to be here. I am very excited to be joining SolanaFloor. And I'm joined, of course, by our senior journalist, Finn, to break down what's moving the ecosystem, what's just noise, and what's actually worth your attention. So, Finn, what's the initial vibe check? What's the market looking like? How's sentiment?
Yeah, Thomas, it's hard to say. I feel like we've had a pretty brutal 2 months. Sol's drawn down about 35%, and there's been a lot of chaos in the air. But over the course of the weekend, I kind of have the impression that a lot of these forced sellers from tending have been shaken out. We've got a nice little 5% bounce on market, which has meant that TradFi investors and ETF investors have actually been slamming that buy button. So things might be turning, but just cautiously optimistic for now. It's still very early days, so we'll have to kind of see what happens next. What's your gut feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see a 5% relief bounce, but it has been a pretty tough little time here, right, for us. So good to see that. I feel like there's a lot of positive momentum, a lot of good metrics. Everything's looking good, but price just isn't quite there yet, right?
Mm. Yeah. So pretty bang a week, really. Like aside from like price action aside, it's been a pretty massive week on chain. We've had insider trading. We've finally got a new proposal for Sol emissions, and we also had a pretty massive event with Monad coming on chain on Solana for its day one launch, and it's really solidifying Solana there as that home of all on chain finance. So let's dive into it and let's go through this first massive story. So
yeah, I think that is a great place to start, right? So I think that the Sol inflation is definitely been on everybody's mind. So why don't we definitely start there and talk us through it?
Yeah. So just for context, around 9 months ago, SIMD 228 was rejected. It was the proposal that was meant to introduce a market-driven emission scheme that would essentially, hopefully, bring down that sky-high Sol inflation. It was rejected on the basis that incoming institutions wanted stable yield, and that smaller validators would probably be priced out due to high voting costs and operation costs. So we've got a new one, SIMD 0441, is a lot simpler. Instead of doing a market-based emissions rate, it's just going to double the disinflationary rate. So instead of Sol emissions dropping by 15% per year, they're going to be dropping by 30% per year. This basically means that we reach our terminal inflation rate of 1.5% 3 years earlier than expected. So that should be happening around 2029. This proposal came through from the team at Helios, and I believe Dean Little from Blue Shift was also contributed a lot to that. So well done to everyone involved on that side. I think it's a good thing. I think it's exciting. I think it's good to finally get this issuance thing kind of taken care of. It's been a bit of a question mark for a long time, and the fact that we might be able to actually reduce some of these emissions and bring down some of that cost of security, I think, is a net positive. I think it's probably over-indexed as far as the narrative is concerned. I think it's more about just the idea of dropping emissions rather than the actual economic implications of that. But I think it's still a step in the right direction. What are your thoughts here, Thomas, on 441?
Yeah, I think the timing is kind of funny, right? We dip in price and then inflation becomes, top of mind for everybody, right? I don't think this is going to be something that 10x is the price of Sol right away, but this is something that needed to be fixed for a while. This is coming from the Helios team, where I think the last one, was a little bit too complicated, and it kind of came from a little bit of an outsider to the ecosystem, right? So it wasn't quite the time for it. It wasn't, people weren't sure about it, but this one, at least my takeaway from the last vote was people wanted something, but that was just a little bit too complicated, where this really simplifies everything. And it seems like the feedback is very positive, right?
Yeah, feedback has been largely positive. I think most people just said, like, yes, this addresses the problem. It's a very light lift as well on the dev side. Instead of having to implement this entirely new market-driven system, you basically just double the existing system. So it's not a huge lift. There's very low security risk as well that comes with that. So I think it has been very popular. There's has still been some pockets of people saying, "Do we actually need this?" If you scroll down a bit further in the article, you can see some comments from the Solana Tech Discord, and the concerns basically are that the emissions problem isn't actually as big as people believe, and that by turning emissions down, we're actually going to make DeFi a bit less productive. So LSTs are going to have lower yield, which is going to make them less appealing for DeFi users. So I guess there is an argument to that. I'm still undecided on whether it's kind of a net positive or a net negative, but I think the fact that a lot of people have been hanging out for this has kind of meant that we can assume that this proposal will get passed pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. Do you happen to know the timeline on when it's actually going to be passed?
The timeline is still vague. In the initial proposal that was drafted up, Helios had given kind of a 6-month lead time, waiting for that to go through. I imagine it is there or thereabouts that this finally does get put to a vote. And I think what's going to be the most fascinating about this vote is that this could be the first time that stakers actually vote for themselves rather than expecting that validators are going to vote in their interests. This is something that has been worked on behind the scenes for a long time. People from Solana Foundation, Exotech, and even Multicoin have been kind of working on this to make sure that there's not this huge kerfuffle around validators having to get consensus from all of their delegators and things like that. So yeah, hopefully this vote goes straight to stakers rather than validators having to kind of organize that for themselves. So that's a great step forward. I think that's really great to see.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's a big step forward for Solana in general. So excited to see that. Excited to see the votes, how they turn out. And I think that allowing stakers to vote and not just relying on validators is a big win for the community.
Yeah, 100%.
Sounds good. So I like that story. Now let's move over to the Vector acquisition on Coinbase. What on earth happened here? You want to talk a little bit about this and set this story up?
Yeah. So this is it's every cloud has a silver lining, right? So obviously it's great to get acquired by Coinbase. Getting acquired Coinbase it's kind of the indication that you've done something really well and you're going to be taken care of, and you can keep working on your product with the brand awareness and the distribution of Coinbase behind you. Unfortunately, this whole story has been kind of overshadowed by the flagrant behavior of one insider. The wallet itself is believed to be either a seed or angel investor in Tensor or a member of the team that's received Tensor tokens denominated in Tensor. So it's not getting a 2 or 3K monthly salary. It's getting, I think, about 20K Tensor every 2 or 3 weeks. So we can assume that it is someone who's been getting vesting. Around 3 days before the Coinbase announcement went live, this wallet bought about 33K worth of Tensor straight off the market. And Tensor eventually did its thing. It ran 8x before anybody even announced it. And CT was awash with people saying, what's going on here? Why is Tensor pumping 8x out of nowhere? This is very peculiar. There must be some insider trading happening. And sure enough, there was this wallet, who believed to be a member of the team or a early investor, sold around the top about a day before the announcement went live. And the worst thing about it is that the execution was absolutely horrendous. So they bought 33K worth. They were up a stupid amount, and then instead of executing these sales in a way that would get them kind of maximum benefit, they just one clipped it all through Phantom. They lost about $120 worth of tokens to slippage, and it was just flagrantly apparent what they were doing. So credit to DeFi Solar who pointed this out. It's a terrible story because it really soured the acquisition story in itself. What's your takeaway from this, Thomas?
Yeah, I agree. And one thing to clarify, you said $120 on it. It was $120,000 that they lost on that transaction, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they didn't really look at doing execution. This was something that was done incredibly quick. And from my perspective, I'm a big fan of Tensor and Vector. This was a big acquisition. I feel like they have like a really good history with Solana, where it's like Tensor was like 2 crack devs that took on Magic Eden, which was basically a unicorn at the time, right? It was like 2 guys versus a whole team, and they managed to flip them and really did a good job with Tensor. So I'm hoping that they get to the bottom of this, and this was just a rogue employee, and they're not it doesn't muddle their actual like contributions to the space, right? Because I think that actually Coinbase acquiring them is big for Solana too, right? Coinbase has been notoriously not anti-Solana, but they haven't been as Solana friendly as they could be. I mean, it makes sense. They have their own L2, which is, you know, tied to ETH, right? But I thought that this was, you know, an olive branch for them saying, hey, we want to improve our, you know, Solana infrastructure. We want to improve what we can offer to the Solana ecosystem. So to see that kind of muddled by this is pretty disappointing. So I'm hoping, you know, they get to the bottom of it and find out if, you know, was just a rogue employee or something along those lines.
Yeah. I think the other layer to the story that a lot of people have overlooked is that it has just left tens of token holders in an absolute limbo, because obviously Vector has been acquired by Coinbase. That's kind of been made a separate thing. The Tensor marketplace has been handed over to stewardship of the Tensor Foundation. You know, this means different things to different people. If the Tensor guys are now running Vector via Coinbase, who's running the Tensor marketplace? You know, is that just meant to be Tensor bag holders are now forced to kind of prop up this exchange? What, like Thomas, if you are a Tensor bag holder, what is your feeling from here? Like, what are you meant to take away from this?
I mean, I'd probably sell, you know, like I don't know, you know, I know that part of Vector was that it was kind of built through Tensor, right? So a lot of those fees were supposed to go back to buy Tensor in the beginning. So I don't really know where that leaves you with the Tensor token. I know that I think they still have another season going for airdrops where they're going to airdrop more tokens out for people that are using Tensor, right? So I really don't know where that leaves you as a holder. You know, I'm personally a fan of the Tensor marketplace. Like I'm not buying a bunch of NFTs these days, but if I do, or if I go to look one up, I'm using Tensor. So it's still a incredibly valuable tool, and it's a fantastic product. I don't know if it necessarily needs two people, you know, the founders to be there to run it at this point, right? Is that something where it can be fully managed by the team and they're not necessarily, you know, making any like groundbreaking new discoveries or new platforms on it? I don't know, but I wouldn't be too bullish on the Tensor token if I was holding it at this point, right?
Yeah, fair assessment. And it is true to say that, you know, Tensor, the marketplace itself, was a very big part of Solana history. You know, at one point it was probably one of the biggest revenue and volume machines on the network. So, you know, it had its moment. I guess it's a shame just to see how this has ended up with, you know, insiders reaping the benefits, really.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes back to Coinbase admin. You know, a few years back, Coinbase itself, you know, somebody was listing tokens on Coinbase. They gave a tip to one of their friends, and this, you know, isn't the first time that they've seen this kind of controversy either, right?
Yeah, and like it also goes beyond, you know, this one wallet that's been identified for on-chain trading. Like if you look at Coinbase and Binance volumes on Tensor pairs, they were up a stupid amount over where they were previous weeks. So a lot of people knew about this acquisition. A lot of people were trading both on-chain and on centralized exchanges before the announcement went out. So yeah, I think in a perfect world, these exchanges have details on all of these traders who were, you know, exploiting insider knowledge to make profits. And hopefully something actually happens with it instead of just, you know, people making a fuss and then no one actually being held accountable for this. So I stick around looking forward to seeing what happens with that one next.
Yeah, what a strange place that puts you in if you're at Coinbase, right? Because I think that didn't they transfer the tokens back to Coinbase after they made this swap? So it's like they have to investigate their own issues. So, you know, that's definitely a weird spot for Coinbase.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Anything else that we want to go over here? I think we pretty much covered that, right?
Yeah, I think we're all over that. It's, yeah, like we still haven't had a statement from Coinbase or from Tensor yet. That's the thing I think a lot of people are disappointed about, is that it's very obvious that something has happened and no one had kind of come out with an official statement to at least explain or rectify or highlight where things might have gone wrong. But yeah. It's a developing and ongoing story, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. So on to some more exciting news. So Solana this week, it's really solidifying its position as the home of on-chain markets in my mind. And you want to tell us why people are calling the calling Solana the everything exchange now?
Yeah. So one of the biggest launches of the year, the Monad token, people have been waiting this for years. I remember when I first read about Monad, like in the depths of the last bear market, I thought this is going to be really interesting. And so on day one, the Monad token was made available on Solana DeFi. So in the same way that Wormhole has bridged over, WBTC and WETH over, it's basically enabled a system by which tokens that are getting launched on their very first day can also be bridged over to Solana and implemented into all of our favorite DeFi apps. The product is called Sunrise, so well done to Wormhole for implementing that. And I was really, really curious to see how this would play out, because one of the biggest trends that we've seen over this year is that a lot of tokens on their day one launch are getting deployed also on Hyperliquid, the unit protocol. So Pump did a huge amount of volume over on Hyperliquid on its debut. Other tokens like 00 were also made available on Hyperliquid. So for me, this is like Solana's way of actually retaliating to that move. So with doing our own kind of Hyperliquid unit protocol-esque move to bring other coins that are native to other ecosystems on their launch day over to Solana. And I was actually blown away at how much volume the Mon token saw on Solana. It completely outstripped the volume on Hyperliquid. It even outstripped the volume that was happening over natively on Monad. So I think we had over like 122% more Mon volume on Solana than on Hyperliquid, which is a fantastic W, first of all, because Hyperliquid is also trying to be, the everything exchange. So we kind of have a two-horse race in which two separate networks are both fighting to really command dominance of that title. And Solana proved that it's in the lead here. I think it's a great step forward. I think it shows that this is probably going to continue to happen. One of the key benefits is that the Mon token was integrated across Solana DeFi, so we can see that Loopscale brought in lending and borrowing on Mon, on day one. And while Hyperliquid has its own Hyper EVM where you have lending apps, things like that, Mon wasn't actually listed on any of those. So there's no way to really sweat those assets and get that collateral used out. So I think big win for Solana there. Thomas, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I love everything about this story, right? So I love this outcome, love the narrative. I personally want to trade everything on Solana, right? These are protocols that have been tried in every possible way. Very comfortable using them. I want to swap on Titan or Jupiter, right? I have the wallets in place to do this, have cold wallets if I want to do long-term holds. And I think that this is like the perfect narrative for Solana because it has all of these already. And I mean, I wouldn't really want to be doing too much on chain on Monad day one, right? So it would kind of leave you in a weird place to be using, brand new protocols on a brand new blockchain. There is kind of a lot there. And I thought there was kind of another interesting caveat to this as well. And in the way that they did it, they had the Coinbase ICO. So full disclosure, I bought into some of this, but the way it worked was you got your tokens, but there's almost like a little bit of a social credit score to it, to where they don't want you flipping and selling your tokens right away. So they're kind of tracking you and what you're doing. So I think that, they're probably going to do this for future allocations for future ICOs or something along those lines. But where that left people is if you bought the ICO, you have tokens that you can't deploy, right? So in order to actually use the ecosystem, say you wanted to buy some meme coins day one or NFTs or really dig into some of the DeFi protocols, you would have to buy those tokens separately. And in my mind, I don't want to use a centralized exchange for doing that. So if I have the option to do that on Solana and bridge it very easily, like that would be the way that I do it 100% of the time. I just think I think the whole execution, I think people were doubting this on crypto Twitter, and they were saying like, why is Solana saying Gamonad? Like why are they doing this? And I think they hit it out of the park. I think it was a slam dunk, right?
Yeah, and I think what it leads to next is that we have this really fascinating dynamic where we have two chains that are both going for this, house all on-chain markets. And on one hand, you've got Solana, which is using, predominantly prop AMMs. Prop AMMs are driving the majority of Mon volume. So it's a very retail friendly system where you go to an aggregator and you hit swap and you get your tokens right away, and it's the best price possible. So you have that on one side, and then on the other side you've got Hyperliquid with its more kind of trader professional-esque UI. You're using a club instead of using just a simple swap, and that's where I see the next big race going to, is that both of these ecosystems are really going to be really trying to attract as much of that day one liquidity as they can and that day one volume. We've also seen, Zcash has come over to Solana in a way that Hyperliquid hasn't been able to onboard yet. So that's kind of another example. And while we don't know what tokens exactly going to be launched next through Sunrise and through Wormhole, I would expect that we could see, future big launches like Mega ETH. If the base token comes in the next few months, I expect that would also be made available on Solana on day one as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's been a narrative in Solana that, the chain works great, everything works really well, but what tokens do you hold for the long term, right? So I think that bringing these native tokens over and having more tokens that people want to hold for a long time, like we're seeing that with stocks, yes, but I mean, to have Zcash come over, we've got good forms of wrapped Bitcoin now. Hypes on there, with all these tokens coming on, it really is becoming the everything exchange where you're going, or the everything exchange where you're going to want to actually hold tokens on there. So I like that part of the narrative too.
Yeah, 100%. It's a great step forward. This is, I think, the battle that's going to kind of play out between Hyperliquid and Solana over the next few months. I think is going to be one of the most fascinating sectors of crypto.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting that it's all spot, right? So it's the spot market now that they're competing for, where, Hyperliquid obviously perps, way bigger market, but for Solana to have, what is it, 122% of the spot volume of Hype is huge. That's a big W.
Yeah. And even the fact that there was more non-spot volume on Solana than on Monad itself, I think is also a staggering statistic. And granted, it's not apples for apples, right? Because if you're trading Monad on Solana, you're probably just getting your airdrop and dumping it and playing with price. Whereas if you're a Monad native user, you're going to be throwing that into lending protocols, and you're going to be being a bit more exploratory. So not exactly like for like, but I think still a great indicator that shows that Solana is the place to be trading things.
Yeah. I love that. It's going back to just use Solana, right? Everything on there is working, battle tested. So I love to see that.
Yeah, 100%.
Sounds good. Anything else that you want to go over on that part, or do we hit it all?
No, I think we're good to move on to the next story there.
All right. So we started out with saying the market conditions weren't the best, but one thing that is going really well is these ETF flows. So bad market conditions on chain is doing really well. But let's talk about the ETFs and how the TradFi bros are doing on Wall Street.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, Sol is plummeting. We've lost 35% in the past 2 months or so. ETF investors seem pretty unfazed. We've just recorded 2 of the highest daily inflows since launch week. If we keep the trajectory, we're going to have the biggest weekly inflows since Solana ETFs went live. The Bitwise guys, Matt Hogan and Hunter Horsley, are frenetically bull posting to all their clients. It's looking pretty positive. And I think the thing that is the final kind of straw to drop in this story is that Franklin Templeton's ETF is going to be launching probably in the next day or two. Franklin's been very bullish on Solana for probably the last year or so. They keep shilling it. They keep talking about how it's the next big blockchain to compete with Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I imagine that a lot of Franklin Templeton clients are pretty eager to get some exposure. So my attention is completely on the Franklin Templeton inflows and to see if they can kind of catch up to Bitwise. Something that I did notice that I thought was quite remarkable is that I think Bitwise's fees are 0.2%, and Franklin Templeton has come in and hit that at 0.19. So they're really cutting into the lunch of Bitwise, and I'll be curious to see if any of those flows kind of go over to try and take advantage of that extra percentage point.
Yeah, that's huge, right? I think that this is just setting us up really well for a better market structure in the long term, right? This wasn't the reaction price wise that you expected for this, but I'm pretty sure that this probably muted some of the downside selling, right? This is a remarkable amount of inflows for us to see during this market, right? So I'm pretty excited about this. I think that it's a fantastic way to get exposure to Solana, right? These are staking ETFs, so the inflation, even though it's being reduced, you're not getting inflated out of your tokens. You're actually participating, in the staking, which I think is a great way to hold Solana. And I mean, this opens up holding Solana into retirement accounts, 401ks, and really opens up the market, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And at this rate, I remember in January this year, I think JP Morgan said they were anticipating anywhere between $3 and $6 billion worth of inflows in the first year for the Sol ETFs. They revised that to 1.5 billion in October, and we're pretty much on the border of 1 billion about 4 weeks after launch. So really positive signs. I suspect that we're going to continue to trend up and probably align with around actually, I'm not going to throw any predictions out there because I'm not a TradFiber. I don't know, but I expect that we would surpass these expectations that JP Morgan has hit for 1.5 billion in AUM within the first year.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I mean, it's just going to be continued action going too. So I'm really excited about that. Let's see.
21 straight days of inflows is pretty remarkable. Like I looked through the data recently, and both Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs only lasted around a day, 2 or 3 days before they started seeing negative outflows. Solana's just put in 21 straight days, even while the market's going down. So ETF investors, they're buying the dip. They're long-term players. It's looking pretty good so far. Obviously it's looking good until it's not looking good, but we're approaching 1 billion in AUM. It's very positive signs for the Solana folks out there.
Yeah, I mean, we need somebody to be buying the dip, and they are absolutely buying the dip right now, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Sounds good. So yeah, I mean, it kind of seems like things are lining up where we have TradFi buying the dip, on-chain activities like going really well as well, as Solana is becoming the everything exchange. Are we moving away from meme coins for good at this point?
Yeah, so one of the stories that was included in that newsletter is a data report by our data analyst Ario, who crunched the numbers on all the on-chain swaps to really see what's happening behind the scenes. One of the biggest trends coming out of that is that meme coin activity is pretty much at the lowest it's been in many months. If you go back 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, meme coin volume was making up between 30 and 15, even 60% of all on-chain volumes. That's been crunched down to about 10% now. So if you're trading on Solana, you're not trading meme coins anymore. That's not what you're here for. We're seeing sectors like Bitcoin, like project tokens, like RWAs getting a lot more volume than they used to be. So while meme coins are going down, volume across the entire chain is staying pretty consistent, and all that capital is just rotating into more mature assets, let's say. So that tells a great story in the sense that critics have said for ages now that Solana is only a meme coin casino and that's all it's ever going to be. Data is proving that that's not the case. There's a much more mature clientele using Solana these days, and hopefully that continues to be the case. Obviously, if we go back into a risk-on period, people are going to start trading meme coins again. But you've got tokenized stocks now, you've got tokenized gold, you've got kind of everything that more mature markets would be able to offer you, and people are adopting it. So great to see. Yeah, are you a big advocate of mature RWAs? Are you looking forward to seeing more of those?
Yeah, I love RWAs. I've always said that Solana's kind of struggled with the whole with having store value tokens and with having tokens that people are going to want to hold for a long time. And I mean, the fact is, if you were holding any of these meme coins, during the last couple of weeks, like RIP, those are down, 90%. If you're only down 50%, you're doing great. And so I think what we're kind of seeing is a little bit of that meme coin hangover. Liquidity is a little bit dry. People aren't in as much profit. So we're not seeing that meme coin activity. I don't think meme coins are dead. I don't think they're going to go away, but I don't think it's going to be the majority of what Solana does. And I think that's what all of this is proving out, especially, these graphs. And that's been a long time narrative that Solana is just the meme coin chain, where in reality, I mean, Solana was NFTs, Solana was meme coins, but what it really did was like that helped pave the way to really like test the network, right? So imagine how many transactions were trying to be landed when the Trump coin launched or when the Melania coin dropped. Like that was unprecedented amounts of volume that we were able to maintain. It definitely stressed things, but because of that, we have a much better trading experience with all assets, and that's what we're seeing is the move away from meme coins, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. It was the stress test we needed to prove that the system works, and now that the system is getting better every single day, so now we're just seeing more mature assets, and it's leaning into that ICM thesis and that anything that you want to trade, you can trade on Solana. Another really fascinating stat, I think that Ario highlighted up here, if you stay on this graph, is that smaller traders are actually phasing out and being replaced by larger traders. So ticket sizes under $100 have been diminishing. No, sorry, ticket sizes between $100 and 1K have been diminishing, while swaps between 1K and 10K have been getting larger. So that tells us that we're steering away from, just any old Tom, Dick, or Harry, making small swaps, and we're moving into larger bucket sizes with what our Ario data analyst has called serious retail. So, more established people are flocking to Solana and taking use of these markets. So that's good to see. And additionally, like the fact that you can still trade small amounts is also great, because not everyone has the same amount of money, and you should be able to access these markets regardless of whatever kind of size you're using. But just it's a fascinating trend to watch.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the more that we keep talking, the more bullish all of this sounds on Solana. So like I like the way that this is shaping up. Like all of these pieces are really coming together. I mean, more trading in more size of better assets on Solana just sounds like an amazing narrative, right?
Yeah, and it's a nice validation, right? After all these months of getting slandered as being a meme coin chain, it's proof that the people who've stuck around and shown that Solana is more than that are now getting to see that actualized before their very eyes.
Yeah. Yep. Agree 100%. Yeah. Anything else that we want to go over here? I mean, launch pads, there's just the volume is just not there. I don't even know if we need to go over that, right?
No, look, launchpad volume is a proxy for froth. There's not a whole lot of froth in the market, so no one wants to be, slinging Pippi Sol 2.0 on Pump Farm.
Yeah, and that could very well change in the future, but that's where we are now. And closing out this week's top stories, we've got a date for the wet ICO. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so Jupiter unveiled their ICO platform months ago, and we've been eagerly waiting to get an actual launch date for the first coin that's going to go there. It's going to be Humidify. We learned this a few weeks back. Really, really curious to see how this actually plays out. Humidify is doing a stupid amount of volume. It's the biggest DEX on the network. It's doing more Sol USD volume than Binance is. There's no better place to trade for Sol than using Humidify or SolFi or one of these prop AMMs. So I'm really, really curious to see how this plays out. The market doesn't know how to value or how to price prop AMM tokens. It's easy to lump it in with other DEXs like Radium or Meteor or Orca, things like that. But it's going to be a wait and see game. I think the thing that gives me pause about the wet ICO is that we actually still know nothing about the token. We don't know what its utility is going to be. We don't know how it's going to be used. We don't know the supply. We don't know, who's getting what amount of tokens. We know there's going to be an airdrop, but we don't know what kind of size that's going to be. And given that, prop AMMs execute most of their trades off chain, we can't actually track how much revenue Humidify is making. Now, rumors get passed around in group chats. I don't know if there's a whole lot of credibility to that. So is it going to be an absolute banger? I'm not sure. I think a lot of people are having a hard time valuing what wet is going to be worth based on the fact that we have no idea what kind of revenue they're making.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to come out with some of those details before, because I mean the rise of the prop AMMs is a massive story on Solana. This is, great for traders, great for everybody, right? I mean, this is really getting rid of a lot of all the MEV that we saw for a little while, right?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of prop AMMs. I was very cautious around them for a long time because there was so much unknowns. But as time has gone on, and we've seen that these operators are genuinely legit. They're improving price discovery. They're making trading Solana on Solana infinitely better. The spreads are insane, and yeah, I'm just there's just that hesitancy around how much money they're making, whether that's going to float at the token or not. There is an argument that a prop AMM doesn't necessarily need a token. That the whole point is that they operate behind the scenes in the darkness, and nobody knows that they even exist. And 97% of the people trading on Solana don't know that these platforms exist. So they don't even have that pressure to launch token. They could not launch token, and nobody would expect anything from them otherwise. So yeah, curious to see how much revenue they're actually making. We'll need to see whether that flows through the token or not. And I'm hoping that that information is made public in the next few days before that ICO actually goes live.
Yeah, it would make sense for them to do that, right? And it is a strange thing to value, and we've been seeing a lot of good ICOs come out lately. So I'm hoping that this is another one. I thought that one of the interesting parts of this one is that Jupiter's doing it, right? So they're releasing their own ICO platform, and it's interesting that Jupiter can almost kind of do anything at this point, right? I think that they're going to continue to do this as well. They have the users, they have the distribution, and really in crypto, and especially on Solana, distribution is everything, right? They have the swap users, they have the wallet, and I think that they're going to continue doing this where if there's a popular narrative or a new meta, I think they're either going to look at potentially buying one or building it, and they can direct their users to it. So I think it's a successful business model, and it does kind of remind me of the Facebook's style, right? Facebook was the early winner in social, then they bought Instagram, then they bought WhatsApp, and they can kind of compete along anything that comes up. So I think I see that type of narrative forming for Jupiter. I don't know if that's the best thing or the worst thing, but it's definitely interesting. And I mean, so far they've done a great job. Like I am a big fan of the Jupiter mobile app, and their swaps are great as well. So I don't know. I don't know what's your take on that.
Yeah, I would argue that like Jupiter's brand and its distribution is one of its biggest products.
Yeah.
Jupiter can bring something to market, and they know that they're going to have thousands of users from day one just because they've got such a passionate and almost fervent community who are willing to try anything they produce. Yeah, it's a big basket. Like they call it the DeFi super app for a reason. I think there's still plenty of great competition coming from other teams. There's a great saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none." I'm not applying that to Jupiter in any respects, but I think it is worth considering the fact that like the more you expand and the wider you go, the less laser focused you are on certain things, and that gives room for competitors to come and disrupt the market. So it's a fascinating dynamic, and yeah, we'll have to see if Jupiter's ICO platform kind of holds up to the standard that's been set by Metaplex and MetaDAO.
Yeah, definitely. I think that for us as users, it's a good thing, right? To see competition and to constantly kind of push the envelope into, how can they compete? What can they do better? And then, both, whatever teams are competing end up providing a better product for us in the long run. So I see it that way, and, we'll see how it goes, obviously.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, that wraps up the top 6 stories of the week, but we can roll through to the honorable mentions. Massive week on Solana, so not everything gets to make the top 6. I'm going to run through the honorable mentions very quickly right now. At the top, Privacy Cash crossed $1 million in volume across 23.5 thousand wallets. So very evident people on Solana want privacy. Privacy Cash is providing that for transaction and sending funds from one wallet to another. What else? Phantom has launched its advanced trading terminal. Trading terminals are the bread and butter of the on-chain Solana experience. We've seen how well Axiom has done. We've seen how well the Pump Padre, or I guess it's called Terminal now, isn't it, has done. So Phantom is joining that race. Marinade has launched its first recipe, allowing stakers to earn boosted USDG rewards on top of their staking rewards. So that's a really fun way of kind of expanding what Marinade is able to offer. So well done, Marinade, for that. Ore Supply has cracked 10 million in total revenue. The mining continues. People are abandoning the trenches, they're going to the mines, and Ore is making a bucket of revenue. I think it actually flipped Pump Fund recently in daily revenue. So well done for that. Bitwise Solana ETF has reached 500 million in AUM. It's the biggest ETF we have at the moment. I think Franklin Templeton might give it a run for its money over time, but Bitwise is the clear leader there. Otherwise, Helium has hit $200 million in 200 million daily active users. These aren't people with Helium hotspots. These are people who are just using the network unknowingly while Helium does its carrier offload. So this proves that Deepin is working. It's hitting critical mass, and it's expanding crypto beyond our tiny little bubble. So fantastic from Helium. The number of wallets holding RWAs on Solana surpasses 100K. This is a vague one, right? Because wallets is easy to game in a sense. You could argue that this shows that there's 100,000 people who are buying RWAs on Solana. I could also run a script that could fire up, 10,000 wallets that buy $0.1 of RWAs. So while I think, counting how many wallets are doing something is a flawed metric, I think it's still a milestone in itself. Otherwise, Range of Finance has introduced RGUSD, a liquid yield token. So this is, I don't want to call it a yield-bearing stablecoin because that's an incorrect term, but that's essentially what we have. We have a coin that holds a stable value and gets additional yield poured on top. So that's great. And finally, Jupiter has burnt 135 million Jupe tokens, valued at 33 million USD. So that was the proceeds of the litter box through which Jupiter routes its half of its protocol revenue. So that's part of a wider move by Jupiter to align token holders again and have a fresh start. Thomas, which of these stands out to you the most? What's the thing that kind of gets you most excited?
Okay, I'll start with all of them, get me pretty excited, but I feel like the number of wallets holding RWAs is impressive. Even if that's easily gamed, like that's something that we haven't seen before. So those are people that are likely going to be holding and sticking around for a long time, right? Like I love the idea of RWAs, holding RWAs, and I love stocks on chain, right? Like I love the idea that you can hedge your meme coins with some stocks. It's simple, it's clean, and I like to see that. I'm also a Helium subscriber for my phone, so it's crazy to see that they've actually hit like 2 million users. That's a pretty big milestone as well.
Yeah, awesome. So scrolling down a bit further, we get to the great summary. We have the stat of the week. This week's stat of the week is Mon volume on Solana. As we mentioned earlier, day one Monad volume was parabolic on Solana. We got 87 million in the first 24 hours. This was more than Hyperliquid. It was more than KuCoin, Gate, Kraken, and BitGet. And if we consolidate all crypto trading venues across the industry, including centralized exchanges, Solana handled the 5th highest Mon trading volume, again, across all venues. So internet capital markets happening before our very eyes. Scroll down a bit further, we have the state of Solana in a tweet. This one goes out to DeFi Solar, who was the one who, I guess, shone the light on our Tenza Insider. Again, this poor insider with terrible execution lost 120K in slippage when he was exiting. This is your message. Don't do insider trading because people will find you. And if you're going to do it, don't do it like this. This is a tragic loss of funds.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And is that the whole newsletter there? That is a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, a lot happened this week. So that's how we have to pack it up.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I just got to say that I'm honored to be on here with you. So I've been reading your newsletter. Like, if you aren't subscribed to this newsletter, what are you doing? Subscribe to it now. Like, this is a fantastic newsletter. It's the Solana 6, but you get even more under it. And the way that you are able to bring in on-chain data, bring good data, and like craft a narrative around it is perfect. So it's like Wednesday morning, the first thing I do is go and take a look at it. So so thank you for doing this, and thank you for letting me join on this.
Yeah, Thomas, 100%. Thank you so much for coming on, and welcome to the SolanaFloor weekly video stream, and we'll see you next week.
All
We'll
right.
close the stream up there, yeah?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Thank you so much, man.
Awesome. See you, Tom.
All right.